Welcome to Tales Told When the Windows Rattle. I'm Tim Prossel. I'm going to open with a quotation. Hunting after haunted houses is, in one sense, a dispiriting sport, for though haunted houses abound, I never could run down a ghost, at least only once, and then it hastily ran from me. This quotation comes from James John Hissey in a book titled The Charm of the Road, England and Wales. Hissey wrote a number of books. They were published in the late 1800s and early 1900s, so the late Victorian period into the Edwardian period. They were all travel logs, chronicles of his tours through Britain, England, Wales, Scotland. I don't know that he ever made it to the continent or even over to Ireland. I don't know that for sure, but I do know that his books are very, very charming. At times, he can become a little bit crusty. He didn't seem to care very much for change, so in an early book, he might say something like, "I don't much care for these motor cars rushing about," and then in a later book, he'll be chronicling his travels in a motor car. So he's kind of everybody's grandfather. In just about all of the books, at some point he goes hunting for a reputed ghost. It might be on a haunted hill, it might be in a haunted churchyard. But in a book called Over Fen and Wold, he goes looking for a haunted house, and this is one of his most extensive chronicles of trying to find a ghost. And it's funny because he never seems to find one. It's kind of heartbreaking, but at the same time, it's kind of amusing too. So this is a cutting of Over Fen and Wold by James John Hissey. It was published in 1898, and that's something to keep in mind. He's traveling by horse, not by motor car. We had so far been disappointed in our search after a haunted house this journey, but nothing daunted, the following morning we set forth on the same errand, having heard that there was, quote, a real haunted house, close quote, at Holton Holgate, a village situated about 8 miles from Wainfleet. Haunted houses are strangely coming into note and repute again. I really thought their day was over forever, but it seems not so. The good old-fashioned ghost that roams about corridors and stalks in ancient chambers till cock-crowing time, the ghost of our ancestors in the early numbers of the Christmas illustrated papers, the ghost that groans in the ghastly manner and makes weird, unearthly noises in the middle of the night, appears once more much in evidence. I had nearly said had come to life again. He is even written about seriously and complainingly to the papers. In a long letter to the Standard that appeared therein on 22nd April 1896 under the heading of A Haunted House, the writer gravely laments his lot in having unwittingly taken a lease of a house from which he and his family were driven solely on account of the ghostly manifestations that took place there. The letter, which I afterwards learnt was written in absolutely good faith and was no hoax, commences, "In the 19th century, ghosts are obsolete, but they are costing me £200 a year. I have written to my lawyer, but am told by him that the English law does not recognize ghosts." The reading of this caused me to open my eyes in wonderment. The assertions were simply astonishing. Still, the law seems sensible. If any man were allowed to throw up an inconvenient lease on the plea of ghosts, where should we be? The writer of the letter, it appears, was an officer in the English army. "Some time ago," he proceeds, "I left India on furlough, and being near the end of my service, looked out for a house that should be our home for a few years. I may say that I am not physically nervous. I have been under fire repeatedly, and have been badly wounded in action, and have been complimented on my coolness when bullets were flying about. I was not then afraid of ghosts as far as I knew. I had often been in places where my revolver had to be ready to my hand." As winter drew on, and as the nights began to lengthen, strange noises began to be heard. The governess used to complain of a tall lady with black, heavy eyebrows who used to come as if to strangle her as she lay in bed. She also described some footsteps which had passed along the corridor by her door of someone apparently intoxicated, but in fact no one had left their rooms and no one had been intoxicated. One night the housemaid, according to her account, was terrified by a tall lady with heavy dark eyebrows, who entered the room and bent over her bed. Another night we had driven into town to a concert. It was nearly midnight when we returned. Our old Scotch housekeeper, who admitted us, a woman of iron nerves, was trembling with terror. Shortly before our arrival, a horrible shriek had rung through the house. To all our questions, she only replied, "It was nothing earthly." The nurse, who was awake with a child with whooping cough, heard the cry and says it was simply horrible. One night, lying awake, I distinctly saw the handle of my bedroom door turned and the door pushed open. I seized my revolver and ran to the door. The lamp in the long corridor was burning brightly, and no one was there, and no one could have got away. Now, I can honestly say there is nothing against the house but ghosts. It is a roomy, nice, dry house. There are no ghosts, are there not? This is truly astonishing reading, considering, as I have already stated, that I know the communication was made in perfectly good faith. A brave soldier to be driven out of a very comfortable and suitable home by a ghost, for thus the story ended. For curiosity, I cut out this letter and pasted it in my commonplace book. The subject had almost slipped my memory when, just before starting on our prison tour, I read in the Standard of 30th August, 1897, of another haunted house in Lincolnshire. The account was long and circumstantial. Having perused it carefully, I took note of all particulars, determining to visit the house, if possible, to see if by any means one could elucidate the mystery. As it may interest my readers, I venture here to quote the article in extenso. The more am I induced to do this, as it happened, we did manage to inspect the house at our leisure, and had besides a long conversation with Mrs. Wilson, who claims to have actually seen the ghost. But I am getting previous. It will be noted that the account is of some length, and that the story was not dismissed by the editor of the Standard in a mere paragraph. This, then, it is. From Holton Holgate, a village near Spilsby, Lincolnshire, comes a story which is causing some sensation among the country folk in the neighborhood. For some time, rumors of human bones having been discovered under a brick floor of a farm near the village, of strange tappings having been heard, and of a ghost having been seen, have been afloat, and it was with the intention of trying to sift the mystery that a Lincoln reporter has just visited the scene. The farmstead, where the sounds are said to have been heard and the ghost seen, stands some distance back from the high road, and is occupied by Mr. and Mrs. Wilson and their servant man. On being interviewed, Mrs. Wilson was at first reluctant to make any statement, but eventually she narrated the following story. We came here on Lady Day. The first night or so we heard very strange noises about midnight, as though someone was knocking at the doors and walls. Once it seemed as though someone was moving all the things about in a hurry downstairs. Another time the noise was like a heavy picture falling from the wall, but in the morning I found everything as right as it was the night before. The servant man left, saying he dared not stop, and we had to get another. Then about 6 weeks ago I saw something. Before getting into bed, my husband having retired before me, I thought I would go downstairs and see if the cow was all right, as it was about to calve. I did so, and when at the foot of the stairs, just as I was about to go up again, I saw an old man standing at the top and looking at me. He was standing as though he was very round-shouldered. How I got past I cannot say, but as soon as I did so, I darted into the bedroom and slammed the door. Then I went to get some water from the dressing table, but feeling that someone was behind me, I turned round sharply, and there again stood the same old man. He quickly vanished, but I am quite certain I saw him. I have also seen him several times since, though not quite so distinctly. Mrs. Wilson conducted her interviewer to the sitting room where the figure appeared. The floor in one corner was very uneven, and a day or two ago Mrs. Wilson took up the bricks with the intention of relaying them. When she had taken them up, she perceived a disagreeable smell. Her suspicions being aroused, she called her husband, and the two commenced a minute examination. With a stick, 3 or 4 bones were soon turned over, together with a gold ring and several pieces of old black silk. All these had evidently been buried in quicklime, the bones and silk having obviously been burned therewith. The search after this was not further prosecuted, but a quantity of sand introduced and the floor leveled again. Dr. Gay, to whom the bones were submitted, stated that they were undoubtedly human, but he believed them to be nearly 100 years old. Now, it happened whilst we were at Boston that we purchased a copy of the Standard of 13th September 1897. On glancing over this, our eyes caught sight of the following further and later particulars of this haunted dwelling, now exalted into the Lincolnshire Ghost Mystery. The account brought up to date ran thus. A Lincoln correspondent writes, "Despite all efforts, the Lincolnshire Ghost Mystery still remains unraveled. That the noises nightly heard cannot be ascribed to rats has been amply demonstrated, and other suggestions, when acted upon, likewise fail to elucidate the matter. All over the country the affair has excited the greatest interest, and 2 London gentlemen have written asking for permission to stay a night in the house. Other letters have been received from clairvoyants asking for pieces of silk or one of the bones discovered under the floor, whilst a London clergyman has written advising Mrs. Wilson to bury the bones in consecrated ground. Then, he says, the ghostly visitor will trouble you no longer. The owner of the house in question, a farmstead at Holton Holgate near Spilsby, has tried to throw discredit on the whole affair, but such efforts have failed, and it now transpires that the house was known to be haunted fully 30 years ago." The mystery had quite a promising look, and coming across this second account of it just as we were approaching the neighborhood of the scene of ghostly doings raised our curiosity still more and increased our determination not to miss this rare opportunity of inspecting a genuine haunted house. See it somehow we must. Now, it occurred to us that as Holton Holgate was within easy distance of Waynfleet, our landlord would surely know something about the story and the people, and that he might enlighten us about sundry details. So, in the morning before starting, we interviewed him in his snug bar, and having shown him the cuttings from the Standard that we had brought with us, awaited his comments. "Oh, yes," he began, "I've heard the story, but do not put much account on it myself, nor do I believe anyone else about here does. I think the London papers have put more store on it than we do. They say noises have been heard in the house at night. Well, you see, sir, the house stands on the top of a hill and is very exposed to the wind. I've been told that there is a small trap door in the roof at the top of the staircase, which is, or was, quite loose, and at the foot of the staircase is the front door, and they say that when the wind blows at all strong, it gets under the door and lifts the trap up and down, and this accounts for the noises. Perhaps there may be rats as well. I fancy the noises frightened the woman when she first went into the house, and she imagined the rest. At least that's my view of the matter from all I've heard." Manifestly the landlord was unbelieving. Truly, we too were skeptical, but even so we thought the landlord's explanation of the nightly noises rather weak, notwithstanding his further remark that he thought the woman was very nervous, and the house being in a lonely situation made her the more so when she was left in it by herself at times, as she frequently was on their first coming there. "But that hardly accounts for her seeing the ghost," we exclaimed. "Oh, well, I just put that down to nerves. I expect she got frightened when she went there at first, and, as I've said, imagined the rest. I don't believe in ghosts seen by other people." "And what about the human bones?" we queried. "Well, as to the bones, they say as how when the house was built, Some soil was taken from the churchyard to fill up the foundations, and that fact would account for the finding of them. It certainly seemed to us that the landlord's theory and explanations rather added to the mystery than helped to clear it up in any way. His reasonings were hardly convincing. We noted one thing in the landlord's arguments that appeared to us almost as improbable as the ghost story, namely, the way he so readily accounted for the existence of human bones under the floor by the removal of soil from the churchyard, the latter we afterwards discovered being about a mile away from the place, and even allowing such a thing to be permitted at the time of the building of the house, perhaps by rough guess some 50 years ago, such a proceeding was most unlikely, as soil could be had close at hand for the digging. We felt that now we must wait till we got to Holton Holgate for further details. We had an introduction to the rector of the parish there, and we looked forward to hearing his views on the matter, for surely he of all people, we reasoned, would be in a position to help us unravel the mystery. Matters were getting interesting. At last, it seemed, after long years of search, that we should be able to run a real haunted house to earth. And we determined, if by any means we could arrange to do so, that we would spend a night therein. It would be a novel experience. Indeed, we felt quite mildly excited at the prospect. Failing this, it would be something if we could converse with a person who declared that she had seen an actual ghost, and who would describe to us what it was like, how it behaved itself, and so forth. We had come across plenty of people in the world from time to time who declared to us that they once knew somebody who said that they had seen a ghost, but we could never discover the actual party. For some cause or another, he or she was never get-at-able, and I prefer my facts, or fiction, first-hand. Stories, like wine, have a wonderful way of improving with age. Indeed, I think that most stories improve far more rapidly than wine. I once traced a curious 3-year-old story back home to the place of its birth, and the original teller did not even recognize his offspring in its altered and improved garb. Tradition is like ivy. Give it time, and it will completely disguise the original structure. The weather being fine, and having finished our interview with our landlord, we started off without further delay, anxious to have as much time as possible before us before our day's explorations. The country still continued level, the road winding in and out thereof, as though determined to cover twice as much ground as needful in getting from place to place. Just beyond Wainfleet, we passed, close to our way, the tallest windmill I think I have ever seen. It looked more like a lighthouse with sails attached than a proper windmill. It was presumably so built to obtain all the breezes possible, as in a flat country the foliage of the growing trees around it is apt to deprive a mill of much of its motive power. In fact, an Essex miller once told me that, owing to the growth of the trees around his mill since it was first built, he could hardly ever work it in the summertime on account of the foliage, robbing him of so much wind. Then, as we drove on, we caught a peep of low wooded hills ahead, showing an uneven outline, faintly blue, with touches of orange here and there when the sun's rays rested on the golden autumn leafage, now lighting up one spot, now another. We were delighted to observe that our road led apparently in the direction of these hills, for they gave promise of pleasant wanderings. Farther on, we reached a pretty little village with its church picturesquely crowning a knoll. Here we pulled up for a moment to ask the name of the place from a man at work by the roadside. "This be I-B-R-Y, he responded, spelling, not pronouncing the name, somewhat to our surprise, so we asked him why he did so. "Well, sir, you see there be another village not far off called Orby, only it begins with a O, and ours begins with a I, and the names do sound so alike when you speaks them, that we generally spells them to strangers to make sure. Often folks come here who wants to go to Orby, and often folks who wants to come here gets directed to Orby. One of the names ought to be changed. It would save a lot of trouble and loss of temper." When we asked him how far it was to Holton Holgate, he said he thought it was about 3 miles, but he was not quite sure, not being a good judge of distances. It might be more or it might be less, which was rather vague. Indeed, we noticed generally in Lincolnshire how hard it was to obtain a precise reply to any query as to distance. Here is a sample of a few of the delightfully indefinite answers made to us from time to time when seeking information on this point. "Oh, not very far. Some goodish bit on yet. Just a little farther on. A longish way off. A few miles more." To the last reply, a further query as to how many miles only brought the inconclusive response, "Oh, not many." In due time we bade goodbye to the level country, for our road now led us up quite a respectable hill and through a rock cutting that was spanned at one point by a rustic bridge. It was a treat to see the great grey strong rocks after our long wandering in fenland. The character of the scenery was entirely changed. We had touched the fringe of the wold region, the highlands of Lincolnshire, wide, wild, and open to the air. At the top of the hill we arrived at a scattered little village, and this proved to be Holton Holgate. The church stood on one side of the road, the rectory on the other. To the latter we at once made our way, trusting to learn something authoritative about the haunted house from the rector, and hoping that perhaps we might obtain an introduction to the tenant through him. Unfortunately, the rector was out, and not expected back till the evening. This was disappointing. The only thing to do now was to find our way to the house, and to trust to our usual good fortune to obtain admission and an interview with the farmer's wife. We accosted the first native we met. Of him we boldly asked our way to the haunted house, for we did not even know the name of it. But our query was sufficient. Evidently the humble homestead had become famous and had well established its reputation. We were directed to a footpath, which we were told to follow across some fields. "It'll take you right there." Then we ventured to ask the native if he had heard much about the ghost. He replied laconically, "Rather." Did he believe in it? "Rather." Again. We were not gaining much by our queries. The native did not appear to be of a communicative nature, and our attempts to draw him out were not very successful. To a further question, if many people came to see the house, we received the same reply. Manifestly, for some reason, the native was disinclined to discuss the subject. This rather perplexed us, for on such matters the country folk, as a rule, love to talk and enlarge. As he left us, however, he made a somewhat enigmatical remark. "I wish as how we'd got a ghost at our house." Was he envious of his neighbor's fame, we wondered, or what did he mean? Could he possibly deem that a ghost was a profitable appendage to a house on the show principle, insomuch as it brought many people to see it? Or were his remarks intended to be sarcastic? Having proceeded some way along the footpath, we met a clergyman coming along. We at once jumped to the conclusion that he must be the rector, so we forthwith addressed him as such, but he smilingly replied, "No, I'm the Catholic priest," and a very pleasant-looking priest he was, not to say jovial. We felt we must have our little joke with him, so exclaimed, "Well, never mind, you'll do just as well. We're ghost hunting. We've heard that there's a genuine haunted house hereabouts, an accredited article, not a fraud. We first read about it in the Standard and have come to inspect it. Now, can you give us any information on the point? Have you by any chance been called in to lay the ghost with candle, bell, and book? But perhaps it is a Protestant ghost beyond Catholic control." Just when we should have been serious, we felt in a bantering mood. Why, I hardly know, but smile on the world and it smiles back at you. Now, the priest had smiled on us, and we retaliated. Had he been austere, probably we should have been grave. Just then this ghost-hunting expedition struck us as being intensely comical. The priest smiled again. We smiled our best in reply. We intuitively felt that his smile was a smile of unbelief. In the ghost, I mean. "Well, I'm afraid," he replied, "the worthy body is of a romantic temperament. I understand that the bones are not human bones after all, but belonged to a deceased pig. You know, in the off-season, gigantic gooseberries, sea serpents, and ghosts flourish in the papers. You cannot possibly miss the house. When you come to the end of the next field, you will see it straight before you." And so we parted. Somehow the priest's remarks damped our ardor. Either he did not or would not take the ghost seriously. Reaching the next field, we saw the house before us, a small, plain, box-like structure of brick, roofed with slate, and having a tiny, neglected garden in front divided from the farmlands by a low wall. An unpretentious, commonplace house it was, of the early Victorian small villa type, looking woefully out of place in the pleasant green country, like a tiny town villa that had gone astray and felt uncomfortable in its unsuitable surroundings. At least we had expected to find an old-fashioned and perhaps picturesque farmstead, weathered and gray, with casement windows and ivy-clad walls. Nothing could well have been farther from our ideal of a haunted dwelling than what we beheld. No high-spirited or proper-minded ghost, we felt, would have anything to do with such a place, and presuming that he existed, he at once fell in our estimation. We despised him. I frankly own that this was not the proper spirit in which to commence our investigations. We ought to have kept an open mind, free from prejudice. Who were we that we should judge what was a suitable house for a ghost to haunt? But it did look so prosaic, and looks count for so much in this world. The flat front of the house was pierced with 5 sash windows, 3 on the top story and 2 on the ground floor below, with the doorway between, the sort of house that a child first draws. We did not enter the little garden nor approach the regulation front door, for both had the appearance of being seldom used, but wandering around we came upon a side entrance facing some farm outbuildings. We ventured to knock at the door here, which was opened by the farmer's wife herself, as it proved. The door led directly into the kitchen, where we observed the farmer, seated by the fireplace, apparently awaiting his midday dinner. We at once apologized for our intrusion, and asked if it were the haunted house that we had read accounts of in the London papers, and if so, might we be allowed just to take a glance at the haunted room? "This is the haunted house," replied the farmer with emphasis, "and you can see over it with pleasure if you like. The wifey will show you over." So far, fortune had favored us. The wifey, at the time, was busily occupied in peeling potatoes. "For the men's meal," she explained. "But when I've done, I'll be very glad to show you over and tell you anything." Thereupon she politely offered us a chair to rest on whilst she completed her culinary operations. "I must get the potatoes in the pot first," she excused herself, "or they won't be done in time." "Pray don't hurry," we replied. "It's only too kind of you to show us the house at all." Then we opened a conversation with the farmer. He looked an honest, hard-working man. His face was sunburnt, and his hands showed signs of toil. I should say that there was no romance about him, nor suspicion of any kind. The day was warm, and he was seating at ease in his shirt-sleeves. "I suppose you get a number of people here to see the place?" we remarked, by way of breaking the ice. "Yes, that we do. Lots of folks come here to see the house and hear about the ghost. We've had people come specially all the way from London since it's got into the papers. 2 newspaper writers came down not long ago and made a lot of notes. They will be coming down again to sleep in the house one night. We gets a quantity of letters, too, from folk asking to see the house." "Have I ever seen the ghost?" "No, I cannot rightly say as how I have, but I've heard him often." There's strange noises and hangings going on at night, just like the moving about of heavy furniture on the floors and knockings on the walls. The noises used to keep me awake at first, but now I've got used to them and they don't trouble me. Sometimes, though, I wakes up when the noises are louder than usual, or my wife wakes me up when she gets nervous listening to them, but I only says the ghost is lively tonight and go to sleep again. I've got used to him, you see, but he upsets the missus a lot. You see, she's seen the ghost several times, and I only hear him. The wife, meanwhile, was intent on her work and made no remark. "This is all very strange and interesting," we exclaimed. "And so the house is really haunted?" Now it was the wife's turn. "I should think so," she broke in, "and you'd think so too if you only slept a night here, or tried to, for you'd not get much sleep unless you are used to the noises, I can tell you. They're awful at times. I daren't be in the house alone after sundown. I'm that afraid." "And you've actually seen the ghost?" I broke in. "Yes, that I have, 3 or 4 times quite plainly, and several times not quite so plainly. He quite terrifies me, and one never knows when to expect him." "Ah, that's an unfortunate way ghosts have," we remarked sympathetically. "But good-mannered ones are never troublesome in the daytime. That's a blessing." Eventually the busy housewife finished her task, and the peeled potatoes were safely put in the pot to boil. At this juncture she turned to us and said she was free for a time, and would be very pleased to show us over the house and give us any information we wished, which was very kind of her. We then slipped a certain coin of the realm into the hands of her husband as a slight return for the courtesy shown to us. He then declared that there was no necessity for us to do this, as they did not wish to make any profit out of their misfortunes, and, as he pocketed the coin with thanks, said they were only too pleased to show the house to any respectable person. The farmer certainly had an honest, frank face. His wife, we noticed, had a dreamy, far-away look in her eyes, but she said she did not sleep well, which might account for this. She appeared nervous and did not look straight at us, but this might have been manners. First she led the way to a narrow passage in the front of the house that contained the staircase. On either side of this passage was a door, each leading into a separate sitting room, both of which rooms were bare, being entirely void of furniture. Then she told us her story, which I repeat here from memory, aided by a few hasty notes I made at the time. "Ever since we came to this house we have been disturbed by strange noises at nights. They commenced on the very first night we slept here, just after we had gone to bed. It sounded for all the world as though someone were in the house moving things about, and every now and then there was a bang as though some heavy weight had fallen. We got up and looked about, but there was no one in the place, and everything was just as we left it. At first we thought the wind must have blown the doors to, for it was a stormy night, and my husband said he thought perhaps there were rats in the house. This went on for some weeks, and we could not account for it, but we never thought of the house being haunted. We were puzzled, but not alarmed. Then, one night, when my husband had gone to bed before me, I had sat up late for some reason, and I was just going up that staircase, I distinctly saw a little bent old man with a wrinkled face standing on the top and looking steadily down at me. For the moment I wondered who he could be, never dreaming he was a ghost, so I rushed upstairs to him, and he vanished. Then I shook and trembled all over, for I felt I had seen an apparition. When I got into the bedroom, I shut the door, and on looking round saw the ghost again quite plainly for a moment, and then he vanished as before. Since then I've seen him about the house in several places." Next, she showed us into the empty sitting room to the left of the staircase. The floor of this was paved with bricks. "It was from this room," she continued, "that the noises seemed to come mostly, just as though someone were knocking a lot of things about in it. This struck us as singular, so one day we carefully examined the room and discovered in that corner that the flooring was very uneven, and then we noticed besides that the bricks there were stained as though some dark substance had been spilled over them. It at once struck me that someone might have been murdered and buried there, and it was the ghost of the murdered man I had seen. So we took up the bricks and dug down in the earth below and found some bones, a gold ring, and some pieces of silk. You can see where the bricks were taken up and relaid. I'm positive it was a ghost I saw. The noises still continue, though I've not seen the ghost since we dug up the bones. Whew. After this, there being nothing more to be seen or told, we returned to the kitchen. Here we again interviewed the farmer and found out from him that the town of Spilsby, with a good inn, was only a mile away. Thereupon I decided to myself that we would drive on to Spilsby, secure accommodation there for wife and horses for the night, and that I would come back alone and sleep in the haunted room, if I could arrange matters. With the carriage rugs, the carriage lamp and candles, some creature comforts from the inn, and a plentiful supply of tobacco, it appeared to me that I could manage to pass the night pretty comfortably. And if the ghost looked in, well, I would approach him in a friendly spirit, and he being agreeable, we might spend quite a festive evening together. If the ghost did not favor me, at least I might hear the noises. Oh, it would be something to hear a ghost. Thereupon I mentioned my views to the farmer. He made no objection to the arrangement, simply suggesting that I should consult the missus as to the details. But, alas, she did not approve. You know, she said, addressing her husband, the gentleman might take all the trouble to come and be disappointed. The ghost might be quiet that very night. He was quiet one night, you remember. Besides, we promised the two gentlemen from the London paper that they should come first, and we cannot break our word. Appeals from this decision were in vain. The wife would not hear of our sleeping the night there on any terms. All forms of persuasion were in vain. Manifestly, our presence in the haunted chamber for the night was not desired by the wife. As entreaties were useless, there was nothing for it but to depart, which we did after again thanking them for the courtesies already shown. It was not for us to resent the refusal. Every Englishman's house is his castle, according to English law, and if a ghost breaks the rule, well, the law does not recognize ghosts. So, with a sense of disappointment amounting almost to disillusion, we departed. I feel quite hopeless now of ever seeing a ghost, and have become weary of merely reading about his doings in papers and magazines. I must say that ghosts, both old and new, appear to behave in a most inconsiderate manner. They go where they are not wanted and worry people who positively dislike them and strongly object to their presence, whilst those who would really take an interest in them, they leave severely alone. James John Hissey, and an excerpt from Over Fen and Wold. What a sad, sad ghost hunter. He's certainly the saddest and most frustrated of the ghost hunters who you can meet in a book titled The Victorian Ghost Hunter's Casebook. This is a collection of chronicles of actual ghost hunts that were published between 1837 and 1901. That's the Victorian period proper. Most of the ghost hunts are much more productive than this one. In fact, some of them are downright scary. If you're interested and want to find out more about the Victorian Ghost Hunter's Casebook, please visit brombonesbooks.com. There you can download and read my introduction to the book. You can also read some of the reviews. In fact, one of the reviews comes from the Society for Psychical Research, and back in the Victorian period, they were at the top of the list in paranormal investigators. And they're certainly well represented in the book. Once again, the title is The Victorian Ghost Hunters Casebook. Find out more at brownbonesbooks.com. Well, I have to go now. I'm Tim Prossel, and thank you very much for listening.